Welcome, CEOs. I am Hermione Olivia, and I invite you to cherish every opportunity to connect the dots. CEO Yourself was created as a destination for motivation and to inspire you wherever you are on your journey to become the CEO of your life. Coming up on this week's episode of CEO Yourself.
You got to do it, and you only gain confidence by going to the places where you don't have any. I think the biggest longevity hack, forget about all the supplements, forget about all the things, is can you sit alone with yourself in a room, quiet, and not be in this ruminative turmoil where you can't sit with yourself?
It must bring a great sense of calm, knowing that you own every decision you've made.
Yes.
Because rather than beating yourself up about it, you just accept it and move on.
Exactly. And beating yourself up about it is a form of control.
Nicole Vignola is a neuroscientist, brain performance coach, and author of Rewire. In this week's episode of CEO Yourself, we deep dive her CEO superpower, influence. Nicole, welcome to CEO Yourself.
Thank you so much for having me.
I don't usually do this, but for this episode, I would love for you to explain to me and the listener, what is a neuroscientist? What do you do every day?
Yeah, so neuroscientists study the mechanics of what is going on in the brain. We can diverse into cognitive neuroscience, which looks at more like systems. I was looking at decision making and attentional networks. But generally speaking, neuroscientists look at the neurobiology, what is going on in the hardware component of the brain. And then psychologists tend to look at more of the software of what is going on. So that's how I explain it.
I love that.
Yeah.
The reason I have been so excited to have you on the podcast is because I feel our missions are very aligned, which is to help people become the best versions of themselves. How do you use neuroscience to do that?
That's a great question, because I was studying neuroscience and I wanted to find a way to make it accessible to people in organizations and everyone. So I went into organizational psychology. That's what my master's is in, because I wanted to merge the two concepts together. I wanted to take neuroscience out of the labs and apply it to everyday work life so that people could improve themselves in everyday settings.
What's the number one lesson you've learned?
Oh, I don't know if there's just one, but I think a lot of people will focus on the big things, the fancy things, the supplements, and there's nothing wrong with any of that, but they don't get the basics right. So in the beginning, when I was coaching people, I'd have these very high functioning executives and I was treating them like athletes, and I was saying, but you're not sleeping 8 to 9 hours, but yet you're pushing yourself in the workplace like you're an athlete. And they were like, oh, I'm an athlete. I was like, you're working at a high performance. Just because you're not maybe using your body as physically, as much as an athlete, to some degree, you still got that mindset. And that was like a penny drop moment for a lot of my clients, where I had to teach them to go back to basics, hydrate correctly. The first thing I said when I walked in here, I was like, I need to drink before I get on here. Otherwise my brain's just going to short circuit while I'm trying to explain a concept. And so sleep, regular exercise, nutrition, the foundations of what makes the hardware component, that is the brain, healthy, so you can make software upgrades to your habits, behaviors, thought processes.
So it is the habits every day, isn't it? This is what our CEO Yourself philosophy is all about. So our philosophy is vision plus strategy plus habits.
Okay.
Let's start at the end with habits, because you've gone there. What are those easy little habits, aside from those lifestyle habits that you've just mentioned? What are the easiest habits that we can adopt to become the CEO of our lives?
Yeah, I talk about this on every podcast and all the time. I think people are probably sick of me hearing it, but not grabbing your phone first thing in the morning. Because when you do that, you're setting yourself up for not failure, but you're not starting on the right foot. You're increasing stress hormones. You're programming yourself to news that maybe is not serving you. And when you wake up, you're in these slow kind of brain waves, brain states, where you can hone in on quite a lot of creativity and introspection. So to grab your phone first thing and then snap yourself out of that straight away, you're doing a disservice to yourself. So not grabbing your phone first thing and delaying it as much as possible, I think, is probably the most underrated tool in improving your mental health and just improving your productivity. Because when we reach for something that's quick and easy, dopamine releases quite early on. And dopamine being released is not a bad thing, because if you do it through exercise, that's great. But it's the volatile high of reaching for something that is seemingly effortless, like scrolling. What that means is then you're on this roller coaster for the rest of the day, trying to find the motivation to then do the rest of your tasks.
I found it much easier to charge my phone out of the room before I had a child.
Right.
Now I have this kind of sense of urgency, like I need to have a phone there in case I need it. What do you do practically to stop yourself from picking up your phone first thing in the morning? Do you charge it out of the room?
I do.
Yeah.
Because if it's there, it's just so easy. You know, you want to make the easy things difficult so that the difficult things become easier. And charging it out of your room is one way to do that. You know, if you have that fear or worry, and I completely resonate with that. I mean, my partner bought a burner phone, one of those Nokia 3310s off eBay.
That's genius.
And you can have that as your emergency phone if you ever need to, you know, but also, you know, if you're in an emergency, you can get from room 1 to B relatively quickly. It's just this association of feeling that the phone has to be there all the time.
It does. It feels like safety.
Yeah. It's
even
an
though it's
extension
not.
to your body. Yeah.
Okay, so that's an incredibly easy habit to adopt.
Yeah.
What do you do with your mornings then? If you're not picking up your phone straight away, how do you utilize?
I read or I stretch. So those are the first 2 things I do. I drink water first thing as well, because even a 2% dehydration can cause a temporary cognitive impairment. So, you know, impair your psychomotor activity, which is how quickly you react to things, because your brain kind of shrivels up a little bit. And what it does is it pulls away from the meninges. The meninges are the layers of the brain that protect the brain from the skull and kind of separate the two. And that's why you get a headache when you're dehydrated, because that pulling is creating tension, and that's the headache. Then
everyone out there, just take a sip of water. I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Now.
And so if you've been sleeping for 8 hours, you probably haven't drunk for 2 hours before going to bed, so you're extremely dehydrated.
Mm-hmm. How long does it take to form a new habit?
Research says between 18 to 254 days, which sounds like a lot, but it's dependent on whether there's habits that need to be broken before, maybe trying to change a habit and adopt a new one. It depends on how much intensity and frequency is being applied to this new habit. It also depends on, you know, stress levels, sleep, etc. You know, sleep is one of our best tools for integrating new habits and memories and learning, because that's where we consolidate all the information that we've gathered from the day. So it is a multifactorial sort of amalgamation of factors that contribute to someone adopting a habit quicker or not. But the point I'm trying to make is that it should be looked at more as like a journey of change rather than a quick fix.
How would you adopt a new habit if you were going to go about that?
Okay, so get specific with me. What kind of habit?
Again, for me, since I had a child, I went from being quite an avid exerciser to putting it at the bottom of my priority list. Mm-hmm. So it rarely ever happens. Okay. But I know it makes me a better mum, it makes me a better boss, it makes me a better wife, it makes me a healthier, happier human. How do I bring it back to becoming a habit?
Yeah. So I've actually had something similar where I've fallen off the bandwagon with stretching first thing in the morning. I always used to roll out of bed onto my mat, stretch. And we moved into a new house, and the yoga mat's now in the cupboard. And every Friday I'm like, I said this week I was going to start. And
I'm so glad you're also struggling with it too.
And so we have to, again, make it easy for ourselves, make the difficult things easy. So now I've actually gone and put the yoga mat right next to the bed so that I can remember. So with exercise, the thing with time, there's something called Parkinson's law, is that if we allocate a specific time for a task, we will take up the entire time that's been allocated for it. So what is generally suggested is to slot in the things that you have to and want to do, your non-negotiables, and then the rest of your work time will fit around that. Now, I understand with children it's different because you don't allocate time to them. It's, you know, but maybe waking up earlier and forcing yourself to exercise. It's going to be brutal for the first 3 days probably, but then what will happen is your circadian rhythm is very good at adapting to what is happening. You'll start getting tired earlier. So when you put the kids to sleep, I don't know, 8 o'clock? 7? Oh, perfect. By 9 o'clock, you can be in bed. Mm-hmm. But the more we sleep in, the less tired we are at those times. So you can force yourself to wake up earlier, and it will feel like hell. By day 3, it'll start to get easier.
What is the optimal amount of sleep we should get each night?
7.5 to 9 hours. So the reason they say 8 is because we sleep in 90-minute increments, so cycles. And so by the time you've gone to bed and you've fallen asleep, you'll probably get 7.5.
Brilliant. Now, you've spoken a lot about the habit loop. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so the habit loop is essentially cue, trigger, reward. And what that means is sometimes things will trigger us from our environment, or we have time-dependent cues which remind us to do particular things. So as humans, we have these subconscious kind of, not triggers, because triggers has been associated with a negative connotation, but I guess a cue that reminds you to do something. So a classic one is you go to your parents' house, you walk in the kitchen, and you're like, oh, all of a sudden I want Nutella on toast that I never crave at my own house. And that's a cue. It's an environment-dependent cue. And so with these cues, we can use them to our advantage. And that's why having a routine is quite helpful, because the one cue will then lead on to the next cue, which will lead on to the next habit, and etc. And it becomes a kind of like cycle.
So what's your advice as to how we can implement a habit loop, a positive habit loop into our lives?
One of the things that really works is visualization. So and visualization doesn't have to be a mental imagery. It can, of course, that's great. But I've now bought a a weekly planner, and I've color blocked everything that I'm doing. And I've gone back to basics where I literally write, wake up, stretch, drink water, which seems silly. And then I tick it off, because that visual ticking off of me doing it is reinforcing the behavior until it becomes a habit. And the thing is, you've had exercise as a habit in the past, so it's not going to be very difficult for you to re-adopt it.
I just find it fascinating that some habits are so easy to implement, and some are a real struggle. Why is that the mind, is it just the positive cues?
The positive reinforcement, and some habits, what's the drum roll, is they're never really going to be super exciting to, undertake. And it's the reason why a lot of ADHDers will sort of overlook brushing teeth, for example, because it doesn't actually bring you reward past the fact that it feels nice that your teeth are clean. And because of that, it means that we can overlook some of the habits that are necessary sometimes. So that's an extreme example, but we can see it in our everyday life in, neurotypicals, where, things that you should be doing are not necessarily as rewarding. And we also have a tendency, both neurodivergent and neurotypicals, to prioritize the immediate reward. So the phone, the scrolling, the Netflix, it's always going to be more fun than the journaling and the exercise, etc., until you do the others long enough to understand what the positive benefits of them are. It's almost like you've got to play that long game, and most people don't know how to play the long game.
What about with children? How do we show them positive habits? Because I assume they pick it up based on our behaviour.
Yes.
Is it critical, even from a young age, for them to see us making, I assume, healthy choices?
Yes. So we have something called observational knowledge, which means that we watch our parents and peers interact through the world and then adopt the mannerisms, and we form, when in our formative years, a set of rules of how the world works. And it's based on watching other people. And so, you making sure that you are encouraging a healthy lifestyle, it's almost like actions speak louder than words. That's the thing that they're going to remember and stick with versus, saying it but not doing it.
Now, you touched on visualization. Thank you. We started at the end with habits. Let's move back to the beginning of our principles, which is vision. Yeah. My strong belief is that your vision is your future. We visualize everything before it happens. I visualized you being here, and here we are. How do you encourage us to use neuroscience to visualize the path of our dreams?
So I'll go back by talking about a study, and this is super interesting. So they did a study where they took two groups of individuals that had never played the piano before. Group number 1 had to learn to play a 5-finger piece on the piano, and group number 2 only had to imagine that they were playing this 5-finger piece on the piano. Neither of them had ever touched a keyboard before. And what they saw was that both groups had the similar levels of activity in the brain, same levels or similar levels of plasticity, showing that just through thoughts alone, we can start to create a blueprint for where we want to go. Now, neuroscientific studies have then, built onto those and many other studies, looking at what reinforces visualization, and that is physical action. So we can change the functional connectivity between the motor cortex, which is responsible for initiating movement, and the parts of the brain that think about it. And so by mentally imagining it and then physically reenacting it, you're now closing the gap between where it is you want to be and where you are right now.
You have imagined this incredible life for yourself,
Thank you.
including your new book. You were on the Today Show recently in America. You know, your life is really popping off,
Thank
for
you.
lack of a better word. How did you visualize where you wanted to go? How specific and granular were you?
It's funny because a lot of the things that I visualized have come true, and not maybe even in the way that I expected, but very similar. So I remember sort of looking at people like Mel Robbins and, a couple of other people and thinking, oh my gosh, I want to be like that. But I didn't really follow on with those things. Maybe I did subconsciously because I then studied organizational psychology. I then, I guess, became, public in the public eye. I became, prominent. So I don't remember sitting down visualizing purely because I didn't know about it at the time. So I think I actually accidentally landed on it, but I guess it was always in my mind's eye. And so my brain and my body was enacting the things that I was paying attention to. So what I'm trying to say is we have this system in our brain that filters out information that is not important. Right now, you're looking at me, but there are still things in your periphery. I can see the camera here. I can see the curtain behind me, but I'm still looking at you. My brain's blocking those things out to say that, Hermione, you're important. And so what that means is we can tell ourselves what's important, and our brain will start paying attention to what is important and then block out the things that are not. It's a classic, you want to buy a Jeep, and now you see Jeeps everywhere. There was always the same amount of Jeeps. It's just that now you're seeing them more. And so I guess by having this vision of who I wanted to be, I was blocking out the things that weren't serving me and just working towards being this version of who I am today, which is, obviously inspired by many, many leaders.
Now, my strong belief is that women have incredible superpowers, and my mission is to help them tap into their superpowers to become the best versions of themselves. Before we go into your superpower, is there any advice that you'd like to share with our listeners about how they can realize their full potential?
That's an interesting question, and it's one of the things that I talk about a lot. So, like, for example, today I was on a dating podcast, and I was posing the question, instead of asking yourself, what does the person bring to you? What do you bring to the table? And often we are always comparing ourselves to other people and thinking about the wonderful attributes that they have, but very rarely do we spend time thinking about what our best attributes are. And so, something as simple as like working on your core values, figuring out who you are as a person. In the book Rewire, I've got an activity. I'll do it with you. Okay. Have you done it?
No.
No? Okay. So I want you to describe, you don't have to me, but think about the ideal person, the dictionary meaning of the ideal person.
In the world or?
In the world. Like, who's this person? What do they do? What are their values? And then I want you to think about all the similarities that you have with this person. Okay. And then all the biggest differences. Okay. So this ideal person, did you describe yourself? Or at least a version of yourself?
It was someone I'm aspiring to be.
Okay.
And then what was interesting was that their strengths and then my weaknesses were my insecurities and the elements of my personality that I'm confident about.
Exactly. And then to add another layer to that is like our weaknesses, we have to accept them, right? We can improve them, of course, not accept them in the sense that just live with them. But with every strength, there's a weakness. And sometimes you have to also acknowledge what your weaknesses are so that you can say, okay, well, actually, I'm not very good at this and I can try and improve. But that means that because I'm not good at that, maybe I'm better at this. Because we tend to dwell on our weaknesses sometimes. And by doing that, you start to really see what your strengths are and what you bring to the table. What are your core values? Are you your ideal person? And most of the time when we take away that negative lens, we realize that it's always been us.
That's amazing. I hope the listener went on the same journey as me. Did I go on the usual journey?
Yes. Yeah. I actually had a live talk with this woman when she gasped. And I had that on a podcast as well. And I was like, I paid them to do that.
I initially went to figures of in history that are well regarded, like Mother Teresa.
Yeah.
And then I changed it.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
To someone that I really admire, like the best possible future version of myself.
And it's you.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Because people don't realize that it is them that they admire. And it's almost like we live in a world where you have to apologize if you admire yourself. Like, I don't want to brag, but I've got a master's in, you know? And I get that. I get that there's a fine line between being arrogant, but we should also celebrate that we are our ideal person. Maybe not the best version, we can improve in certain areas, but when we really take away that negativity lens, we realize that we're not too far off from who we want to be.
Or if we're very far off, it brings into clear vision where we want to go,
exactly.
Which is an amazing
and that
exercise.
You're not genuinely a completely different person, you know?
Now, we weren't planning on doing this, but we've now done vision and habits. So I'd love to ask you about strategy. And a huge part about strategy is doing the work. So you have your vision, you know where you want to go, you have the habits that are going to set you up for success. But let's talk about being strategic and doing the work in the middle. What is your advice to women in particular about getting to work, doing the strategic work to get from where you are to where you want to go?
Visualization, obviously. One of the things that I think works really well is planning for setbacks, which a lot of people go, okay, I don't know about that, but I talk about it in the book. And so let's use an example. I had a client who was always saying yes. Every time someone asked her for something, she would say yes. And that was what she'd been repeating. It's the automatic response. Cue, trigger, response, reward. That's how it works. And without realizing it, out of habit, she was just saying it. So we started practicing, what could you do in the event that someone asks you and you actually want to say no? It's almost like you have this plan B card in your back pocket where you whip it out. And if you practice it, when you then encounter the situation, you have a plan B that you've now planned for, and you can make the choice to divert into something that you don't normally do. And I think that's planning for setbacks. And I think that it's really helpful because it allows you to change the automatic pattern that you're normally used to. So another one could look like, okay, I have a coach. Sometimes they cancel on me, and so I look for it as an excuse to not do the work in my own time. What if you had a plan B where you either, let's use it as an exercise coach, a fitness trainer, you had a 20-minute workout that you could do at home, no weights, just body weight, a quick thing that you could just whip out. That's still better than nothing, instead of going, oh, well, I guess I won't work out today. And you can do that with everything, you know?
I would definitely not do that workout. I'd be like, cha-ching, I'm going straight to the office. That's incredible advice. And on that, again, something that we hadn't planned to discuss, but I have a big event tomorrow. It's one of my biggest career moments. I'm presenting to 70 women live for 2 hours for the first time, our CEO Yourself workshop.
Amazing.
I know that my pattern is to be incredibly nervous just as I walk out. And for the first kind of 2 to 3 minutes, to the point where I can become emotional, like my voice kind of shakes, and then I get into the flow and the rhythm. How can I utilize your advice about not just visualizing, but planning for that situation to go into that workshop and from the beginning be on fire?
There's so many layers to that. Okay, I'll start by saying one thing is that when you repeat things to yourself, you then embody them because your brain is trying to find evidence that the statement that you've just repeated is correct. So when I have that, I don't really even allow myself to say you're nervous. I reframe it into something more positive. So it's not about slapping on a toxically positive kind of affirmation on top of that, but I reframe it into, yes, you're nervous because it's normal, but you're not because you're prepared and you know exactly what you're doing. Nip it in the bud.
And I'm excited because there's such similar emotions.
Exactly. So I don't really allow myself to go down that route where I'm freaking out because it will spiral, you know? So that's one. Two, I actually open up all my talks with a physiological sigh. So I make everyone in the room do the physiological sigh. So an inhale through the nose, a second inhale through the nose, pause at the top, long exhale through the mouth. Should we do 2 together?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So nice.
I might do that tomorrow morning.
So I start the talks with 10 of those. And I think people have probably figured out by now that it's for me. But I say it's for all of us. But it really helps me because otherwise my hands are shaking. Now, what's interesting is when I was on the Today Show, I don't know if you've seen the video, but I'm quite cool, calm, collected. I was fine. Soon as they said something, they opened their mouth and I had to answer, my whole body just went flooded with stress hormones.
I saw you get more confident as the interview went on.
But I do feel like here I was super confident, but there my foot was shaking. You can't actually see it on the video, but I was thinking like, foot, stop that. But over time, what happens is, like a boxer in a boxing ring, you can separate those two systems of adrenaline, noradrenaline in your brain, adrenaline in the body, meaning that you can remain calm under pressure. So a boxer in a boxing ring can still punch and fight, etc., but know how to make decisions. And that's the beauty of it, is that we can separate those two. So understanding that information helps us to understand that even though my legs are quivering and my hand might be shaking when I'm holding the mic, I'm still in control. And that is completely normal because it's an exciting event. I've got 200 people, 70 people in front of you, and it doesn't need to be a bad thing. And almost accepting that that is part of it. So those are those three layers. But then what you can also do is maybe prepare for the setbacks. And I don't mean that in like, let's think about the worst possible case scenario. But I did this activity with my friend yesterday where she's having troubles at work. And I said, what's the worst case scenario? You get to the point where you don't care and you start, sort of not turning up properly or showing up effectively at work. They're going to ask you to leave. They're not going to fire you. You'll get a redundancy payout. I mean, this is like worst case scenario. And then you'll be able to go on to another job. And but even just talking about it, she was like, yeah, I guess I won't get fired and never find another job again. And just rationalizing it like that can help you understand that the worst case scenario is probably still not as bad. And when we do that activity with a frontal cortex activity, which means that you're doing it as an activity rather than a spiraling rumination, you gain control of the situation. So you could think, well, what's the worst case scenario? You stumble over your words.
Well, I thought last night, if I stack it and fall on the stage, it would be quite endearing and cute, to be honest, like Jennifer Lawrence at the Oscars. So
yeah, exactly.
C'est la vie.
Exactly. I mean, I said an awful thing in my last one where I kind of, it was like a sexual innuendo that I didn't mean to say. And I was like, and I literally went, oh my God, I did not mean to say that. And I laughed and I was like, you know what? I knew that at some point I'd say something embarrassing in front of everyone. I'm just glad it was you guys. And I brushed it off and everyone was giggling and laughing. And
this is such brilliant advice because I hope the listener, whether you're going for a job interview or you want to go in and ask for a pay rise or you want to start a business and you need to ask someone you admire for advice, use that advice and then jump into the fear and do it.
You got to do it. And you only gain confidence by going to the places where you don't have any. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called confidence. How would you get it?
Now let's finally get to your CEO superpower, which is influence. But it has a different meaning to it than I thought it did when you first suggested it. Can you explain to the listener why you chose influence and what it means to you?
Yeah, so I do believe that we're all connected in some way or another. I mean, if we can get etherical, is that the right word? But I love that some of us are in different places of our life. And some people know more than others in specific areas. So if you know something, why not teach it to somebody else? So when I am in a situation where I'm having an issue with customer services or whatever, I will try and like somewhat coach them. And I know this sounds patronizing, but I'm almost like coaching them through it. I'm like, okay, what are the solutions? Let's try, instead of getting angry and then stepping down to their level maybe. And I think that in life, we have strengths and we have weaknesses. And by allowing ourselves to kind of learn from each other, we can influence different aspects that then the next person can leave and say, oh, well, actually, Nicole had this really strong strength that I really want to adopt. And because she influenced me, I'm now going to try, rather than sort of like bumping against people. Because I think in business, especially in business, we can really bump up against each other the wrong way, especially in corporates. I work with a lot of corporates. So it's almost like, how can we influence people to be better by also holding ourselves accountable? Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah.
But can you give us, every week on CEO Yourself, we then do a how-to.
Okay.
So that our community can actually adopt practically how to implement the CEO superpower into their own lives.
Okay.
What would be your key steps about how someone can influence for the better?
Yeah. The question I always ask is, how can I help this person? So another classic one is people who struggle with their mothers or fathers and they have these arguments with them. I'm like, how can you influence this person? What can you do to help the situation instead of letting it become an argument? And that's I think that question is super powerful because it puts the emphasis on you, but in a good way. It's like you're taking extreme ownership. So whether it be take a big breath and just tell everybody to calm down, it's almost like see it from a perspective of coaching other people. But obviously, I have been a coach, so that's how I see it. But how can I help the other person is always the question that I ask myself.
I feel for me, how I perceive that is showing up as the highest level of yourself, the highest version of yourself, in order to impact the world positively.
Yes.
And I found a quote that I think represents that and your work, which was, let's live our life to try to be a good example and a positive influence on someone's life.
I love that.
Which is a beautiful way of presenting you to this CEO yourself world. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. One of my favorite episodes to date, for sure, and something I'm not surprised I was so looking forward to, because you've delivered so much more than I could have expected. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
We always close out the conversation with, what is your legacy piece of advice, which is the piece of advice that you'd most want to be remembered by?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm always trying to teach people is to be self-aligned. So I was having this conversation today and someone asked me, like, how do I know if I should follow my heart or follow my brain? And the thing is, the power is in not trying to overthink either. You're going to make the decision that you're going to make, whether it be right or wrong. You will never know if it was truly the right or wrong one. I mean, sometimes there is a clear, like, wow, I should have gone with the other option. But it's sticking with the decision you've made and standing integral within that. Because I think the biggest problem that people have is this mental turmoil going back and forth. Oh, I shouldn't have done that, this. Make the decision, stick by it, because I can't prove this, and I've said this before, I think the biggest longevity hack, forget about all the supplements, forget about all the things, is can you sit alone with yourself in a room, quiet, and not be in this ruminative turmoil where you can't sit with yourself?
I think perhaps the reason we struggle with the trust we have with ourselves these days is because we've lost touch of our intuition.
Yes.
It is the information overload, but I think it's also often we are, and I am the perfect example of this, I do this too, is potentially relying on other people's opinions too much.
And we have so much external stimulus all the time. How often do you go internally and go, hey, girl, how you feeling? Hardly ever. And then what happens is you lie in bed at night, and that's when all the thoughts that are part of your internal mind wandering start coming out. So if you were to access those thoughts on a more regular basis, whether it be going for a walk without music or meditating or whatever it is, you'll start to kind of check in with yourself and self-reflect on the intuition and the choices you've made. I don't have any regrets, and I've made some awful decisions, business decisions that I'm paying for right now, but I can't change it. The only thing I can do is how can I do better the next time?
It must bring a great sense of calm knowing that you own every decision you've made.
Yes.
Because rather than beating yourself up about it, you just accept it and move on.
Exactly. And beating yourself up about it is a form of control. We're trying to gain control of the situation by berating ourselves. And it's the reason why we stay stuck in bad habits and patterns that are no longer serving us, because our brain learns that we can enact the bad habit and we'll just berate ourselves about it later, and that's our form of control. And so we stay stuck.
Now, I haven't even asked you about your book, which is terrible of me.
That's fine. But I'm having so much fun chatting. I'm like, oh, I forgot about that thing.
When I ask where the listeners can find you, you have written the most spectacular book.
Thank you.
I can't wait for you all to read it. Your book, your brand, your website. Let us know, where can we find you?
It's Nicoles Neuroscience on Instagram, and the book is Rewire, Break the Cycle, Alter Your Thoughts, Create Lasting Change. My website's Nicoles Neuroscience, and I'm too on YouTube now, so
amazing.
I'm giving content every single week.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, Nicole.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
It would mean the world to me if you would share today's episode with someone you feel would enjoy it. And don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and leave a comment.